Welcome all to this next NCD Coach webinar. Most of you know me, but I'm Adam Johnston, co-director of NCD International with Christian Schwartz. It's my wife, Melinda, who has joined NCD International in a more official capacity, in a sense, in recent times. And it's also great to have my colleague Bert here with me, who does a lot of our pioneering work in the NCD network. So our webinar today is entitled NCD Coaching, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And as an NCD coach, you typically get to experience everything in that spectrum, depending on where you work. We thought it important to have at least 4 presenters with us today, because if we only had 3 presenters, you might spend your time trying to figure out who was the good, the bad, and the ugly presenter. They may be wanting to present themselves that way as it is, with their own nuances. But with the challenges of NCD ministry and the joys of that, we just are looking for more and more opportunities to have people share their experiences of NCD. Melinda may touch on this towards the end of the webinar, but we've not necessarily been the greatest community of people for sharing around the world the stories and experiences that have been had. And part of what we're very much working on at the moment is looking for new and different ways to connect the NCD world much more, because we have a common principle-based language. And so it's crazy for us to not take that opportunity for the mutual learning that can provide for us all, and that can encourage us and also teach us as we go further in these processes. So we have 4 presenters today. I'm not going to be saying terribly much because we just want to be hearing from these people. And if we begin today with Gary Diehl. Now, Gary's been working with NCD since about 1998, coaching since about 2002. He has more than 35 years experience in the business world beyond all of that, based in Ohio. And he's an NCD specialist working with Livingstone Associates. So if you want to click your little hand clap buttons or whatever you like to greet Gary, and I just hand over to you, Gary, to just share with us from your heart and experiences in the NCD world.
Thank you very much for the honor and the privilege, Adam, to join this group. Obviously, I've been behind the scenes and listening for quite some time. As you mentioned, my introduction to NCD came back in 1998. And if you don't mind, I will share my screen and we'll walk through a few illustrations here that will frame the conversation. So let me swing this into slide mode or slideshow mode, and hopefully it will look a little bit better than that. Again, my name is Gary Diehl. I live in and have resided all my life except for 3.5 years here in northeastern Ohio. My introduction to the natural church development ideas and principles and language came in 1998 when my home church, a very small rural country church, asked for some help because we were faced with some situations we didn't know how to frame, didn't know how to approach. And I won't bore you with that story, but as a result of that consulting process, I learned, I was exposed to the NCD principles. And Adam, you mentioned a common language that those of us who have embraced the idea of natural church development, we really do have a common language that relates the idea of healthy. But I want to remind us all that, yes, we come from different countries, which changes the pictures. Different cultures change the pictures that our words create. And words are simply the tools God's given us to to paint pictures in our brains and in our imagination. So for me, it was new to be exposed to this description of what healthy looked like, but not have it be what I knew. I just always thought that healthy was what my environment was. So being exposed to that was very helpful. As a result of that consultation experience, I joined that particular consulting group in 2001, became an apprentice with them for about 3 years in November of 2001, and initiated my training with NCD in 2002. So I've walked with a number of churches in the good, the bad, and the ugly as a coach or a participant in unpacking the results. So obviously, I don't want to be the bad or the ugly, but I also know that I'm not the good, as all of us bring all of those things. I think there is a difference between bad and ugly. I thought about this as Bert and I were talking about the subject and what you were hoping to have us share a bit. I thought they were interchangeable at first, but the more I thought about it, and I look back on my experiences with trying to guide churches using NCD language, I wonder if there might be a difference between bad and ugly. Bad might be a poor application of an NCD survey, or the NCD coaching might result in little or not much forward progress. But there isn't noticeable damage or contextual pain in the bad. In an ugly, I think there's where the pain reference starts to take shape, where in some of our experiences, what started with the best of intentions, or hopefully was applied in the best of intentions, ended up being either bad or ugly. And I think there are some things we can reflect on in applying the NCD principles, the tool. I've seen it happen when the church does an NCD survey at the wrong time. Often it's right after a particularly difficult pastoral departure, when there's been some kind of failure, some kind of disconnect in leadership, and the pot has been stirred, so to speak. I think it's also the wrong time when it's in the middle of open conflict. And the two little stars there is, I'm going to share with you an ugly in that. So doing it at the wrong time. I think there's also the opportunity for things to go poorly, badly, almost to the ugly place if the church engages the process in the wrong way. I have actually, after the fact, worked with a couple of congregations, one in particular, that the pastor behind the scenes actually manipulated the survey forms. This is when we were still doing paper forms. So he manipulated the answers on the survey form. I've seen it happen when they just simply did not follow the guidance for the criteria of selecting participants. I've seen it go the wrong way when they take no ownership, or there's an open denial of what the results are telling them about themselves. I've also seen it take a bad turn when there isn't a point person or a team, and just the desire to take corrective action isn't there. So it can be done at the wrong time. It can be done in the wrong way. And I think it can be also done for the wrong reasons. I think one of the instances I can remember is a pastor initiated the process so that he could point blame at the board, and vice versa. It was done in a way to point fingers at something or someone, or it was done as a silver bullet for a church that was dying and refused to accept their own sense of present reality. So we can, in my experience, and I'm probably as convinced of this today as I was when we first started, NCD is the right thing, but you have to do the right thing in the right way, at the right time, and for the right reasons. because if those other three things aren't properly in order, you will sabotage the results you wanted to get by doing the right thing. It won't be the same. There have been a few times, and I will admit this as an NCD coach, that I as an NCD coach dropped the ball. And it didn't turn ugly so much as it turned not nearly as productive or helpful as it could have been. One or two of those instances were when I simply had naive assumptions about the level of understanding that the key leaders of the church had about not only the process, but the value of the results. It has also turned not as productive when we didn't specifically set up an understandable, intentional arrangement for ongoing coaching into and through the process. So as a result, there was insufficient guidance for them to actually target some specific positive actions that they could take. So I think that's where bad and ugly start to come in. This is now a chart. And Adam, earlier in our pre-workshop conversation, you mentioned that your first presentation for results included a -9 score in inspiring worship. This is an example of ugly. And this particular congregation is actually a congregation that I tried to guide for about 6 or 7 years in my denominational work with my home church's denomination. It was once a vibrant, thriving congregation. It had been planted by a dynamic pastor. It was nurtured along the way, and it actually reached its peak in not long after being planted under a different pastor who was probably of the best combination I have witnessed of leadership skills as well as shepherding skills. And they're not always the same. After that particular pastor, where it reached its peak in its heyday, it started a long, slow decline. And it was about the middle of that decline that I got called in to assess what's going on here from a denominational standpoint. At one point, they actually split and they called it a church plant. You know where that's all going, right? So for 4 or 5 years, I tried to assist them and got to the point where they were with a pastor who at the time we got called to help them. And you can see the date is August of 2011. When we got called to try to help them out, they were in a downward spiral and a literally open conflict. The pastor there at the time was a true academic. So he was a teacher, very, very little shepherding skills, very low interaction in terms of shepherding. And this was the result of the survey. We have had one, Adam, like you, I've had one survey where one of the scores showed up negative, and it was in passionate spirituality. But this was about as close as you can get to negative, 0.7 in loving relationships. I won't bore you with the long version of this, obviously, because we have other things to talk about. But this one did turn ugly to the point where the pastor would not accept anything that was being discussed. And it just accelerated the process of pain. We didn't bring the pain. NCD didn't introduce the pain. It accelerated or catalyzed what was going on under the surface and gave them language for it. It resulted in that church actually closing, as did its daughter church, probably about 7 or 8 years later. That whole thread of pain just wove its way all through it. So it was probably the most ugly that I can recall in my NCD process. I do want to thank all of you who are part of the NCD team for actually inviting one of your other colleagues. I think it was about a year ago, you asked John Kimball from the 4 Cs to do a presentation about how he learned how to use NCD in different places in the life cycle curve. And John actually presented this information. So I'm stealing it, but I'm also giving him credit for it. What he taught us in that particular webinar was the idea of using NCD at this turning point. And that was the focus of his conversation with us that day. But that was an aha moment for me, having John just talk through what he and their denomination had been through in learning how to actually apply NCD differently in different places where churches are on the life cycle curve. So it was ministry changing for John to present that information. And it taught me some things that I've tried to help others learn, including my partners in our consulting work, as well as the denomination, that again, I believe NCD is always the right thing. This language that we can come to a common understanding of what healthy looks like, but we may have to change the pictures a little bit, because we are using English words even in this webinar, but they paint different pictures in different minds. So it gives us the scaffolding to start painting the right kinds of pictures of what healthy looks like. And that has really helped us even in the consulting work that we've done. I want to share one of the good ones, and then I'll pause for some questions or thank you and move on. This happens to be a congregation that my consulting partner and I worked with in the last couple of years. It is a real congregation, and because you're all good NCD coaches, you can see what I see here. There's something probably pretty healthy going on in this particular congregation on the surface, with the average being a little higher than 50. So there's only one of the characteristics that actually falls below the 50 center line. A couple other ones are right at 51, but for the most part, there's good, strong muscles in this particular church's environment. But that was on the surface. And our consulting group has always used the NCD work and the tools to help us understand what healthy looks like and paint those pictures for our congregations in terms of a ministry sense, because NCD is a very good tool to help us see what's going on under the surface of ministry interactions and relationships in the church, relationships with God, with ourselves, with each other, and with the world around us in the mission field. So it's about relationships, but there are other areas of a church environment that NCD doesn't point to. So the reality that we came to early on was no one tool is the best tool or the only tool to use when trying to help a church figure out what's in their way. And in our particular instance, this one revealed some information on the surface that was, hey, there's a lot good to work with here. But what we didn't see, or we started to see only after we began poking around with it, there's something else going on here that we need to poke at. So their minimum factor was empowering leadership. You could see that in the overall chart. And you can notice that their lowest score question was, our pastors have too much work to do. This was in October of 2021. So we were a year and change into the whole COVID pandemic and people just scrambling to find out how they're going to stay connected and all of that stuff. So there's something going on here, which was legitimate. Everybody was at this point, and many still are, burned out because they're trying to do so much and learn and adapt along the way. So we looked at under the surface here, and we thought, we should probably take a peek at what's going on there, because one of the reasons that the church brought us in was to do a staffing evaluation. They wanted to know what to do in their staff environment to remove whatever barriers were there for them. This started the indication, but it wasn't all of it. What we looked at then, and this is what, again, you folks at NCD have learned this along the way, and you've taught us how to recognize some of the value in this stuff. In the lowest 10 chart, we noticed that empowering leadership, there are 3 questions in the 10 that are low, in the low 10, but there were also 3 loving relationships questions. Something else is happening here. Something else is going on. And so we poked at the loving relationships questions, and you can see the ones that I circled in red. As we started to explore what is it that's going on in the staff environment here, not only are they tired and burned out, but something else is happening. When we looked at the questions that relate specifically to leaders, we noticed that they're not as healthy as they could be. They're not terrible, but they're not as healthy as they could be. And then we looked at the questions, the other questions that were below 50, and they all relate to some kind of reference to the atmosphere or the environment, which is dominated by the leadership posture. They set the tone for what's going on for the most part. So all of this gave us a whole lot of, we have some questions we need to ask. And ultimately, it resulted in confirmation for us that there was more going on. The presenting issue was the staff thing, and it was related to COVID. NCD was one component of that much larger questioning process that we go through. And the reference in the parentheses there, what we looked for was, where are there barriers to what's healthy or what could or should be happening first in your ministry area of the church? And that's where NCD shines. That's where the language and principles of NCD help us understand what healthy really looks like, not what we think it looks like. The second area of the environment is that we look at and look for those kinds of barriers are in staffing or leadership, both paid and unpaid. What kind of a leadership culture does this environment have? Where are there barriers to what should be happening? The first F is facilities. So physical space. In order to be the church well in the mission field we're called to, you have to have some kind of space. Doesn't have to be a cathedral, but space is involved in relationships with God, with each other, even with ourselves. So facilities, and facilities can get in the way of what a church needs to see happening in its ministries. The fourth one is finances. How are they spending their resources? How are they applying the gifts they've been given? So we look for barriers in all 4 of those areas, and we do a lot of significant pre-work before we get there. The on-site interviews and our observations confirmed this team was overworked, it was tired, they were frustrated, and the working relationships were fractured. That became evident the first morning we were with the team, and we went to worship with them in their worship space, in their sanctuary. And my partner is a musician, so he was playing keyboard, and we just wanted to spend some time in prayer with them. And when they came in, when they all filed in, there were 9 of them. When they all filed in, one sat up here, another one sat 3 rows behind, the third one sat 2 rows behind that one, clear at the other end of the, you get the idea. They were scattered all over the space. It became obvious, we don't even want to be in the same room together as pastors. Something has happened here. So it required a direct intervention with the staff that we actually did later on, using the pictures of healthy, both in ministries and in relationships. Here's what their first survey looked like in 2001. Let me just show you what their second survey in November of 22 looks like, and you can see the difference there. Their average kicked up noticeably. You can see through the dynamic chart here that everything except inspiring worship went up. Several things went up significantly. Number one, their minimum factor went up by 15, but because we had to deal with the loving relationships among the staff first, that's the byproduct, was dealing with the loving relationship issues that was all focused on how do we create a much more empowering culture here. We still dealt with the minimum factor, but we had to go through the learning process and actually identify the real barriers. you can see that their dynamic process, again, in that all but one question moved forward in empowering leadership. The end result was, when we got there at first, this was a congregation that was able to walk pretty well, but they weren't ready to run yet. The difference is, once the real barriers to what was healthy were actually identified and dealt with, just even in a year, the environment has changed noticeably, and noticeably not just by the people who answered the survey questions, but by the staff who actually enjoy working together again. So this is one of the examples of, I think, the powerful good that can be a part of the NCD world. Here's my parting thoughts, and whatever, however you want to steward the piece after this, Adam, is fine by me, or Bert. Just, I want to encourage you as coaches, always keep learning both from the NCD team and from one another as NCD practitioners. We really can actually learn some healthy things from one another. Helping a church understand that healthy is always the right thing. NCD is always the right thing. It's how we go about applying it and using that language and those principles. Pay attention to potential influences of that wrong timing, or the improper way of doing it, or somebody approaching it for the wrong reasons, for something other than what it's designed for. Resist the urge to overestimate the leader's understanding in the church that you're working with. Hold their hand when they need it. You can't control what a church behaves like or what the pastor behaves like, but you can be a good steward of your behavior, and as best we can, be at peace with the process and offer what we have to offer. So a little bad, a little good, one chunk of ugly. I thank you again for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you, Gary. It's a blessing to be able to listen to your both your wisdom, but your heart for the groups and leaders that you work with is very, very apparent, and that's, yeah, such a blessing. Really appreciate that. I've had a change of approach for the session a little bit in mind. What would be great is, if anyone has questions for any of the speakers on the way through, if you could write your questions in the chat window and perhaps just put the speaker's name at the front of the question. That way each speaker has some time to look through those questions, and then at the very end, they can pick out whichever are the easiest questions to answer, or whichever way they'd like to approach it, most contentious, whatever they choose. Yeah, so just in the chat window, the speaker's name and the question you have, and they can mull on that on the way through. Lovely. Thank you, Gary. We'll go to Kjetil now. Now, Kjetil is our NCD partner for Norway, and I might add is really one of our very best partners in the world. He's a great thinker, really puts things together very, very well, and has developed a fantastic ministry in Norway with the collective team. He has a background in economics, management, and pedagogy, as you do. Involved with Fresh Expressions, and is connected to the Christian Council of Norway, and has been involved in building up Telios Life Norway. Very interesting stuff. And Kjetil is married with 3 children. So please, again, click your clapping buttons and welcome Kjetil to our discussion.
Hello, everyone. Well, everybody. I just want to thank Gary for your sharing. It was interesting to hear you. And I also want to share that my English is not so good. So if it should come out some words that's not is the right one, or if you don't understand what I'm saying, you just try to connect with me, and maybe I can repeat what I'm trying to tell you. So And I just want to thank for the opportunity to share, and I also want to share my screen. So I just want to start with some presentation of what NCD look like in Norway, because I've seen that it look like real different in different countries. So in Norway we have an organization with the vision more healthier churches, and we have been working in this for 5 years now. And we also organized this as a membership association, which is led by me and the denominational board, and we have 30 licensed NCD coaches from 12 different denominations, 50 individual members, 80 churches as support members, and 7 denominations as sub-partners. Over the years, we have had 1,000 NCD surveys in 450 different churches. Yeah, and we also have our own publisher, Vext Seagrowth, that we also have some books that we have translated or have written in Norwegian, and the ABC is one of our most popular, most sold books. Addition to the books on need-oriented, need-based ministry. Yeah. One of our main, what we do in Norway, we try to have some courses and to teach some on different levels. And here is some of the courses we want to facilitate during a year, and during a period in a 2 or 3 year time. We have different approach to different parts of the churches, and we also have some thing for the coaches here in Norway, and we also have some open and free webinars that we try to facilitate each year. But I want to share something more with you of what we have experienced just for some courses we have had several times, but this course I had the last weekend, and this was the course on spiritual styles, and it's real encouraging to see how people sharing their stories of faith, and they just taking the spiritual style test, and they have one of the people in our course this weekend say, "Now I have a much larger picture of God." So that was really encouraging to hear, because this is one of the things we want to see in this. And we also have one other course that is really interesting, and that's in the empowering leadership area. And this is an online course, and this is also a course that we have real good fruits afterwards, we can see. So this is what we do here is that we, over a 6-week period of times, we have some video lectures that the people are seeing, and they have some other learning books and reflection forums and other things. And we also had the empowerment test in this course. But the most special, I think, with this course is that we follow up after the first week with 6 individual spiritual change talk sessions with each of the people being in the course. So we don't have a large group in this course, but we have maybe groups of 5 to 8 people in each group. And this winter we had 2 such groups. And it's all often pastors and leaders, but also volunteer workers in the churches joining in. Yeah, that was some of the background. Now I just want to share you something about how one thing we try to stress for the churches in Norway to be beginning NCD process. And one of the things we have seen the last year is that this is a real good picture of what how church development may look like. I don't know if you had a ladder game in your area, but when we show this picture to people who have been working with NCD for some years, they're nodding with their heads and yes, that's right. This is just what it looked like. And it's just not. I think the important thing here is to tell that it's something that we can control and something we can manage to control. But maybe we can prepare the congregations and the church so that we don't tumble down every of the ladders in this board game. This is what we try to stress, and just that we need to do what we can do. We try to we need to roll the dice, and we need to walk steady in one step ahead, and that we need to do the NCD cycle again and again and again. And I had to have some examples of churches that have worked with this in Norway. And the first example is from the Church of Norway, the largest church here, Lutheran. And this church has been working with the NCD since 2014 and have just finished their 5th NCD survey. And what you see here is the level of the minimum factor in red and the average score in the green. And you can see here, if this is maybe, I think this describes one of the good process we have had, and it is really interesting to see how they take steps each time, and when they try to work in the steady way. Each second year they take an NCD survey, and I think they have the pace and they have the visions. So this is I think for this time a good example. But we want to stress what will be laying in front for next year. So we hope that they also will continue to rise the levels and also to stay high on these levels. I want to show you another, and this is not so good, but it's interesting. This is a Pentecostal church in a city in Norway, and here they had real good things going on in the first years, but it soon showed some problems in the leadership, and we saw that the decline in the scores was lower and lower from 2009 to 2013, And then they stopped doing the NCD. And maybe this was before my time as NCD coach, but I've talked a lot about with leaders from that time, and they can after some time afterward can they tell that in this period the counselor and the NCD survey told them something important which they didn't want to see. And from 2013 they had a major crisis in the church. They invested in large new church facilities, but this was never built. Just many millions of Norwegian crowns lost in the process. But from 2022, they have started a new process, and they hope to use it in a better way. So I think it's encouraging that they don't have left it for ever, but come back and take it more seriously, I hope, this time. I have one more example. This is also the Church of Norway. It's a village, suburb place. They have had several surveys, and you see that they struggled year after year from 2004 to 2018 with the same levels. They didn't manage to break through. And we want to learn more about what have happened this time, these years, and the last years now, because if you can see from 2012, they have got a raise in the minimum factor each year, each time, and they also have different minimum factors this time. So I think this is real encouraging for the future for this congregation, and I think it also tells something about the importance of being steady year after year. When maybe they would have, many churches would have lost the visions or lost what they think about NCD as a tool when they don't manage to get higher values. So after New Year, I saw on all our surveys and just wanted to see how important it is to take several and how this look like when I see all the surveys together. And then we got these scores showing that the increase in scores, the points from 50, 52, 54, 56, or it's the different levels they have, but the scores is on the left side, and the amount of surveys P1, P2, P3. So here you can see 7 surveys, and each time they take a new survey, this will on an average they will have a raise in the quality and the health score. So I think I was encouraged to see that we can help them to take some steps when they working for many years. So I think this was the most important with this. And I also have with me some factors that I think we have seen as things that will facilitate or that will maybe hinder this stable development. And the first thing, I think the thing I mentioned, the faithfulness and the rhythm, just doing it again and again is important. It's also important, the leadership, that if the leadership in the congregation guides, involves, equips and releases, I think this is real important if we want to see some changes in the churches. I just want to show you that proactive crisis management staying here. I just in many of the processes going on in the local church, we have seen that eventually it will come to and stop or an end because they've got a new pastor or got a new board or something. And if you can anchor or just have the process grounded in a larger group or just prepared for the transitions from one leader to another leader. I think this is a real important issue, and for some denominations is even more important. The Salvation Army or some other denominations, I think. And the balance is also real important. We see, and also the openness to have a coach, to have support or new impulses to learn new things is also important. And the last things that is not on this list, but as a quote from Christian, it's the atmosphere or something in the leadership and in the church. I think this is an important thing to see growth. So if we can see laughter and if they are having a good time, I think this is also really important. Some of the problems, impatience, we see a lot of this. And someone want to do more than they should, and maybe someone wanted to change the tools, try something new. They want to just have something in activity churches and something. And we try to do our best to lower the press and lower the things that's not so healthy. So in patience, things need time in the kingdom of God. So I think this is one important issue. And also, as mentioned on the good side, imbalance will always be a threat. So in unsustainable priorities, structures, life, theology, all of this, I think will threaten the process. And of course, we have the conflicts, the lack of unity, people going different directions. This is also a thing we see that will halt the process. And the last thing here, just I think Christian is writing a lot about fundamentalism, and just that the churches and the leaders just don't want to learn. I think this is the main issue that will halt the process early. And they may be just taking one NCD survey and they say that, no, this is not for us. Yeah. This is our hope. It's a quote from Christian, and this is what we tell all the churches, that it's just one precondition, and this is just that we long for seeing God more in our congregations. So if we have this this from the beginning and from as energy in the leadership, I think much will come will be fruitful in this process. So yeah, that was something from Norwegian experiences, and I hope that something get to be familiar, or something you have questions about, and you just want to ask them. You can do it later. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kjetil. I'm sure you can all get an appreciation of why the NCD ministry in Norway has been as successful as it has been. I discovered a number of new things there that I wasn't even aware of that you were working on, Kjetil. That's absolutely fantastic. And I mentioned earlier about the ministry in Norway, and in actual fact, just earlier this week, I discovered that the ministry in Norway on a per capita basis is actually the most extensive NCD ministry in the whole world. So we look forward to many more opportunities to continue to learn from what Norway is doing there. So thank you so much, Kjetil, for sharing with us. And again, please, if you have any questions for Kjetil, just put those in the window. I'm very pleased now to introduce a lovely friend of Melinda and mine, Gillian Knight, who has been heading up the NCD ministry in the North New South Wales Seventh-day Adventist Conference since about 2008 in Australia. And the ministry that Gillian has been involved in and has truly had a profound influence within the Adventist movement right across Australia and beyond, and to other countries around the world. She's a somewhat shy lady, but very feisty one at the same time, and has just done an incredible job. And it's such a pleasure to be her friend and to be inspired by the ministry that she's been doing over this time. So please, again, welcome Gillian as our next speaker.
Thanks, everyone. I feel quite humbled to be invited and to be part of this group. And yes, it's a first for me to be involved in one of these webinars. So as Adam mentioned, I'm purely focused, so not an NCD coach as such everywhere, but just mainly helping within the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Australia, and particularly on the East Coast, although I do branch out to a couple of other states within Australia. So what I have to share today, unfortunately, you're going to have to look at my face the whole time. I don't have a presentation. I'm one of those people who likes to tell stories. So don't use pictures as much, but because of the time in the morning, probably in hindsight, it would have been better to have pictures than to have my face at 3 o'clock in the morning. But let's move on. So I'd like to share a few experiences and then link them to what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, or what's in some cases all three. So I just pray today that, you know, what I might have to share and the experiences that I've had will in some way help each one of you in the future. And I just want to thank God in particular for putting me into this ministry, and I'm very passionate about it, and I know that Adam can attest to that. One of the very first debriefs that I was involved in, it was a church with a regular of attendance of around 50 people, and the age range in this church was about 55 to 90. So their results, to say the least, were not really great. One of their lowest scoring questions in the survey was, there is a lot of joy and laughter in our church. And I enjoyed your little quote there from Christian about joy and laughter there before, because it scored 7 points. Yes, and it wasn't the lowest. In fact, the 2 lower questions scoring were in the negative. So that was a challenge for me starting out. What do I say to this church? And I have had people say to me in the past that I have this ability of being able to tell people off in a really nice way, and they still like me afterwards. But with this case, I just tentatively commented that it is a perception of many in this church that you'll not experience any joy when coming together. And there was silence there for a moment, and then one of the more senior gentlemen piped up and said, well, we see no problem with that question scoring low. That's how church should be, quiet and reverent. People certainly should not be laughing in church. Now, I can see some of you laughing at my comments, but this sadly is with that fundamentalist and very strong element in our church as well. There is this thought that we shouldn't be enjoying ourselves at church. I was quite speechless after that, and I really quickly finished my presentation up because there was nothing I could do here. Now, in hindsight, of course, with a bit more experience, I'd have a few more Bible texts up my sleeve that talk about joy and happiness in the Christian life. But after a few years later, I was asked to get involved in the churches in Fiji. And I was very excited at that opportunity to help them discover their strengths and growth areas. And because I had family living over there at the time, I was a bit familiar with the people and culture, and I was quite convinced when we started this process that because they're such a community-minded culture, that they would have to be high in loving relationships, and that was my prediction. At the time, I went over the first time just to convince them about NCD and what a great thing it was going to be. And I kept referring to it as NCD, NCD. And I was getting some strange reactions, and my brother-in-law came up to me later and said, you might want to use the full name of NCD when talking to the group, because the acronym over here means non-communicable diseases. So still health, I guess. But once we passed that hurdle, we were able to move on. And in a few short months, we were able to survey 30 churches there and produce a church profile. The results, of course, I'll share a bit later. But more recently, I did a survey with one of our larger churches here in our conference, and we have about 80 churches in our New South Wales conference. And this church had about 300 people in attendance. So this was my home church, so I was very familiar with it and the demographic of the people that were attending. And this was their 10th survey coming up. And the pastor had always chosen those who filled out the survey. But on this particular occasion, he decided to ask me to facilitate the survey. Of course, like all NCD coaches, I followed the instructions to the letter in choosing my participants. And when the results came back, the pastor was very unhappy as the results were significantly lower than previous years. And he was not doing anything any different that would upset people that much. So what had I done wrong? And he demanded to know who I'd surveyed, and then told me he only ever surveyed the church board. Well, all of those people were in the top leadership. He was so upset. He demanded that I redo that survey the way he wanted, and we sat all the 30 board members down one night and got them to fill it in. The results came back and they were 20 points higher than the survey I had done. So what this told me, whilst at the time I was also upset at what he had done, what it told me and what it ended up being was a good moment, because it showed me that the leadership were happy and things were going great, but this wasn't filtering down to the rest of the members. So there was this complete disconnection between top and middle management in that church. So when I looked at these three stories, and I would put the first category with the older demographic of the church in the bad and the ugly category, it's very heartbreaking to see a group of Christians believing that God expects them not to experience joy and that life must always be serious. Man, if that is the case, then I'm totally lost, because I really love a good joke and a good laugh, as you've probably picked up already. The Fiji experience was both bad and good. Good because it was a first for NCD in Fiji, and I think Adam was excited by that. But bad because it showed me that our Adventist DNA is stronger than the Fijian culture. I'm sure each of us are aware of our respective denominations and their areas of growth. Well, sadly, ours is loving relationships. And when we did this comparison between us and Fiji, loving relationships was the lowest. So I was quite devastated by that. And the last story about our comparison with the board and the members, well, that I labelled good, bad and ugly. But as a parent, I called this now my teachable moment. And while I didn't agree with the pastor on his selection of participants, this comparison of the board versus others has become a very useful teaching tool each year when I lecture to our third year student pastors. So I'm quite grateful to him now. I've found that over the years that when it comes to coaching pastors, it's really helpful to know a bit about them. So because I am able to focus just on our 80 or so pastors that are in our conference, I can actually get to know them. I can ask questions about how they're feeling about the results and what was the first thing that they noticed. It's always my preference to connect one-on-one with that pastor before I share the results with the other leadership of the church, mainly because it's crucial that the pastor is comfortable with the results and he has the opportunity to share in a safe environment first, because then he'll be more likely to trust you with the leadership and the wider church. So that's something I've learnt along the way. Those one-on-one sessions for us are even more important if that lower question, those lower questions relate directly to him and his leadership. So our denomination has what's called an MD program. So it's like a ministerial personal development program. And because we've taken it so seriously here in North New South Wales in particular, our pastors are expected to upload their results and make some comments in this ministerial development program. So it's really important that you have that connection with the pastor, and that's a beautiful part that I enjoy. It's a good chance to care and affirm the pastors, because it can be a really thankless job, especially if they're pastoring that church without the joy. Another thing that I have developed over the years are two short presentations that I show to the leadership of the church. The first one that I do is like for survey number 1. So it's the first time that the church has actually connected or seen anything NCD. So at the beginning, I always like to start with 4 slides that explain the biblical principles behind NCD. and the meaning behind the Trinitarian compass and what the three colours represent. Because both as individuals and as a collective group, it's really important that they connect with what's behind that. And this is important too, because in Adventist churches, being aligned with biblical principles is very crucial to our members. So convincing them that it is okay, even though it's not Adventist, is a big thing. Then by the time I show the second page of the summary guide, because as I said, I'm a story person and a picture person, people understand a little bit more about what their church strengths and growth areas are, and they can relate it back to their own experience as well. So my earlier training was with the great Ian Campbell, if anybody knows him. And then, of course, later I have spent a considerable time bending Adam's ear. My presentations kind of combine a bit of what I've learnt from both of these men. And then I've added my own flavour, which comes from a background of human resources. So I've been in human resources for about 20 years. And for me, it's all about connecting with each person, learning their learning style, I guess, if you like, and keeping it really simple and interesting. Because we often learn in HR that after about 15 minutes, which I've tried to limit myself to, people start to lose interest. So that first part of my presentation is for the right brain people. So lots of images and pictures. And then the second part's for the left brain people with all the charts and the numbers. I try, to keep things simple. I pull out key areas to focus on and share the good first, then the bad, then the ugly. So I get them all excited with the good stuff, and then we talk about what comes next. But when it comes to sharing the ugly part, I never call it a weakness, but I always refer to it as the area of growth. Because in the HR world, we also learn that to use the word weakness to a person has very negative connotations. In personal coaching, so I've done a bit of the gift and inspiration and the leadership coaching as well. You can encourage more change in a person when you tell them they can grow and change. As soon as you call it a weakness, often that individual will accept that it is their weakness and then do nothing about it. So words and the way we use them are really powerful. So I think the Bible says something about that too. For those of you who have had anything to do with the inspiration training, then you will understand the concept of inspiring those around you or draining life out of them. All of you will attest, I'm sure, to being asked at the end of a debrief the question about, okay, so where do we go from here? So I've created 2 slides at the end of my presentations, which are entitled Ways to Connect and then Rediscovering Your Purpose. Because as Adventists worldwide, we need to grow in those areas of loving relationships, but also our glass ceiling, really, if you like, is effective structures. So those 2 are usually at the lowest. In the ways to connect, I really like to give them 3 or 4 ideas on how to increase their relationships in the church. And then with the rediscovering your purpose, I give them some ideas on how to improve those corporate or effective structures or even personal gift-based ministry areas that are scoring lowest. I find that the NCD cycle starters that Adam has done are excellent for getting ideas, and I use them regularly to help with the lowest questions and the lowest themes. I also try to just have them choose one of those ideas to work on at a time. Don't try and fix everything at once, but slow and steady steps back to wellness. I recently, not recently, quite a while ago, wrote an article for our denominational newsletter, and I refer to it when the question of whether the results are true or not, because you often get that question from members, or I certainly do, is, well, you know, I don't believe that you can measure health. You know, it's just not right. I don't agree with it. There's always those people in the church. But firstly, I remind them that, hey, you filled out the survey, not me. This is what you have said about yourself. And if they still question the validity, then then let's just pretend for today that they are true. And how would you help this church? And I tell them the story that a man goes to the doctor. He's not feeling so great. He has some tests. The tests come back and the doctor says, well, your blood results show you've got high cholesterol, your blood pressure's a bit high, and you are carrying a little extra weight. You might think about changing your lifestyle, diet, and have some exercise. Otherwise, you could have a heart attack or a stroke. The man returns home and thinks about what these results show, and he basically has two choices. I do as the doctor suggests, and or do nothing and face the consequences. Our church is like that man. I'm the doctor, if you like. I'm telling you what the tests say, but what you do with that result is up to you. Often this little story that I tell gives them nowhere else to go. And usually I find only the die-hard cynics among them will continue to deny the results are true. But we all know you can't change their perception. Well, I see I've almost talked away for 15 minutes. So happy to open up for any questions you might have for me now, or we'll go into the next person now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gillian. As you can see, it's a true pleasure to work with Gillian, and dearly look forward to the influence of her ministry continuing further in the Adventist Church, and certainly beyond the Adventist Church around the world. That's the best 3 a.m. presentation you've ever done in your life, I'm quite sure, Gillian. Well done. Over to Andy Stevens now. Andy is a senior pastor, and he's been unofficially coaching since about 1999. And in about 2017, he created Andy is My Coach, which I think is pretty cool, to serve churches, pastors, and business leaders. And he's worked with about a dozen churches of various shapes and sizes. And so look forward to hearing of your experiences, Andy. Thank you.
So the good, the bad, and the ugly. And when I think of ugly in America, because that's where I am and that's really what I know, I think of how harmful unhealthy addictions are in our country. Now, I know the assignment. This is just an analogy, so hang with me for a minute. But in the United States of America, over 70,000 drug overdose deaths occur every year. If we take a look at people that get killed in drunk driving, it's 32 people every single day. And these statistics, I think, are ugly. And we know the root cause is addiction. And addiction, they're unhealthy addictions. So the cure is simple. I think we take a look at addiction, and a lot of us know that the cure is admitting that there's a problem and finding qualified help, and then taking steps and taking action. Well, with that in mind, I've been serving in the body of Christ full-time since 1995. And in America, at least, and I'll be curious in the chat later to find out, but in America, I believe that the church at large has an addiction problem. I think that we are addicted to the metrics of man. Attendance, buildings, cash, these things that are so addictive to look at. And I think it has led to outcomes that are ugly. I for instance, Barna Research found that in 2022, 42% of full-time pastors in America want to quit and do something else. That's a terribly ugly thing, considering we are carrying the greatest message ever. Or another ugly statistic, every year, approximately 4,000 churches close their doors in America. 1,000 new ones pop up. That's a net loss of 3,000 faith communities every single year. That's ugly. And the cure is, just like with any other addiction, we need to admit that there is a problem. And the American church needs to admit that they're addicted to the ABCs. It's what gets celebrated. It's what gets promoted. It's what gets published. It's what gets pointed to as the goal. You'll see magazines coming out with the top 100 churches and the fastest growing churches and these things. And I think it's good to celebrate anomalies, but I think it's terrible to overlook so many healthy, vibrant communities of faith that are doing such tremendous works. And this addiction to attendance, buildings, and cash, and thinking that's the end all, is amplified by a church culture that, in my opinion, in America, that we have done in church culture, what we've done is we have merged the values of free market capitalism with a bit of survival of the fittest. And so it brings into it a really unhealthy, unscriptural vibe into the body of Christ, if you will. And so the cure, I believe, is getting to the root to change their fruit with a qualified NCD coach. I believe in it so very much, because I think I know NCD presents metrics that are scriptural, and they're so much more holistic. I love sitting down with people and explaining these to them and getting their eyes off of just the ABC. So often church boards are filled in America with business people that are very savvy in the marketplace, but don't have any clue that the church is bipolar. We're an organism and an organization. We're quite strange that way. And the challenge is this: I've spoken to and worked with church leaders. I've spoken with people in my own denomination and other organizations that oversee churches or are affiliated with a lot of churches, and they can see the light when I begin to share the NCD principles, because they're biblical principles. How could anybody in love with Christ not see the light when they hear about these 8 factors? But they all have something in common. They have not been willing or able to lead a cultural shift to focus on these better metrics. And it's heartbreaking to me, because I see the grip of that addiction. I see denominations where people that oversee churches get graded and rewarded based on numbers, but they're the wrong numbers. And you would think during 3 years of COVID and being shut down that leaders would understand that there's more to it than that. But anyway, so it's just a challenge. It's a sad, ugly truth that we're addicted to these metrics rather than being addicted to creating the healthiest environments in the world for the greatest message and the greatest hope of all time. That's what I think we should be doing in the body of Christ. And we can change the culture, one heart at a time, one pastor at a time, one staff at a time, one congregation at a time, and maybe if we're lucky, one movement at a time. We can change and create a better culture. That's the silver lining of the ugly. Now, I want to shift and tell you that I've got really good news about the bad, okay? NCD is so good that even a bad coaching experience can lead to a good outcome. And I'll get personal. I moved to this church where I'm pastoring now in 2007, and I hired a coach in 2008, and that coach led us through the NCD process. Now, I made a mistake. I should have been there a little bit longer so I could know better who to raise up and put on this church health team. I could have used a little more discernment, but also I could have used a better coach, because this coach really did not lead a healthy process. So if you're going to coach a church through natural church development, which is focused on church health, then your process needs to be healthy. And the way that you frame and shape and manage group conversations needs to be healthy. And this coach that I worked with, he loved stirring up controversy. He loved to be the one who, I get to say something, I'm going to point the elephant out in the room, but he did it in such a way that was antagonistic. And oh, it created so much strife. And our minimum factor was holistic small groups. So we completely blew up the discipleship engine and went to a really healthy, truly holistic small groups program. And because of the way what the process was, you would have thought I was the Antichrist for at least 18 months. I mean, even my wife at times is questioning me, Andy, what are you doing? And I'm like, just trust the process. And I'm like, don't trust the person. I said, I'm telling you what, man, I've read the book. I've read the Bible. These principles work. Just hang in there. But so the process was not enjoyable, but I loved the theory and the application so much that I said, I've got to learn more about this. And so years later, I began my journey into the coaching community, and it's just a wonderful thing. Now, there's two other things that are bad to keep in mind. NCD is bad if the only thing you focus on is the minimum factor. And so every time I work with a church, I tell the pastor, I sit the pastor down and go, look, okay, I want you to focus for a moment on these 7 things over here that are not the minimum factor. Each of them has 4 subcategories. So I want you to spend 1 month, for instance, on empowering leadership. And in your staff meeting on week 1, take a look at the first subgroup. Okay. And I want you to give affirmation and praise and accolades to your staff, and for your staff to give it to church leaders, and find ways creatively on Sundays to insert that into service, and just bring all kinds of affirmation. I said, if you do that, you'll have 7 months to just affirm the staff. And as we're going through the NCD journey together, getting root cause and coming up with great action plans, you'll feel so much affirmation and appreciation. Your staff and your church will look forward to the annual NCD process because they know there's going to get pats on the back. So they won't just think it's oh, great, it's a once a year opportunity to find out where we're not good at. Who wants to sign up for that? Nobody. So that can be bad. Another thing is the NCD process can be painful at best if the church does not have an appetite for change. I can think of one church in specific that myself and my brother-in-law, we were coaching this church together. And we quickly realized that I needed to put my brother-in-law's doctorate to work. He's got a doctorate in organizational leadership. And I said, okay, you need to create for me an assessment and a quick, easy process to identify the appetite for change in a church. Because if the pastor has no appetite for change, and if the board or church health team has no appetite for change, if the congregation has no appetite for change, I'm going to write them a check and give them a refund and walk away and not waste my time or theirs, because I don't know how much time we have, but I am not wasting it on a bunch of people that are happy to be miserable. I am moving on in Jesus' name. So make sure they got to qualify them on the front end and just keep pressing. Now, here's what I want to get to what's good. All right. What's good is actually great. All right. It's actually great. The good that NCD can bring is absolutely unlimited, because the church has been commissioned to do a work unlike any other, and the work that the church does will last for all eternity. It's massively significant. So with that, I want to give you 3 good stories about NCD coaching experiences. First of all, my own, right? I'm like the guy, remember there's some commercial in America years and years ago about this guy that he lost his hair and he bought some company to get his hair back, and he bought the product and he bought the company. Well, I can't buy the company, but I had such a good experience with NCD. And so when I talk to denominational leaders and stuff, when I get the rare chance to, I tell them, I say, hey, you know what? I said, I've been pastoring since 95. I've been at my church since 2007. I sleep better than 99 out of 100 pastors. I sleep so good at night I said, why? I said, because my church is healthy. We focus on the root, not the fruit. I sleep so good. It doesn't mean that we don't have hiccups. Of course we have hiccups. We have people, and people sometimes are stupid and they do dumb things and they frustrate you as a pastor. But I said, I sleep so good, and it's just so, I thank God for it. So it's just been such a blessing in my heart. I can't understand why people wouldn't want to do it. Now, another church I got to pastor, I did 2 or 3 cycles with them. And the great outcome here was their minimum factor was loving relationships. And that's really hard to tell a church. I'm sorry, the greatest thing working against you is the people in your church. And so, but we went through this process and this journey together. And at one church health team meeting, they about had a solemn assembly. There was weeping and crying. And I wasn't trying to bring any conviction or condemnation. I was just asking questions. And what was a beautiful moment was when this group of 12 people realized that they were in love with doing Christian things, but not in love with being Christ followers. They were too focused on the doing and not enough focused on the being. And so we just developed a whole plan to help them to focus on their being more than their doing. And it was profound how it impacted their ministries and the vibrancy of those ministries and all kinds of neat things. So that was just so rewarding. And then the second cycle of that same church, holistic small groups was the minimum factor. And they had a breakthrough moment when they realized that holistic small groups could and should be an avenue that provides congregational care. Because at one point I asked them a series of questions about how congregational care was happening in their church. And I won't bore you with the story, but I told them, I said, I thought you loved this pastor. Like we all love him. I said, no, you don't. You're trying to kill this pastor. I said, you're telling me that if one of 500 people has some type of crisis, they are going to call this man and expect him to put on a red cape and tear off his shirt and be Superman. And I said, come, you're going to kill this guy. And so they were just like, oh my gosh, we can care about people. I'm like, yeah, it was just a great breakthrough moment. And it just transformed their church so much for the good. And then this other church, real quick, inspirational worship was their minimum factor. And it was intimidating because this church is like 5 or 6 times larger than the one that I pastor. I had a wonderful mentor that says, it's okay, Andy, you can be an architect and have design a blueprint for a 10,000 square foot house, but live in a 2,000 square foot house. I'm like, man, that'll preach. Okay. So I went there, and inspirational worship, oh my goodness, to tell a large church that's just, you're not cutting it. That got emotional, that got challenging. They also had a Spanish sector, and I don't even speak Spanish, but we worked it out. But though it was a very difficult topic, the process was so healthy. Because of my first experience, I am hyper vigilant about making sure every conversation, every focus group, every experience we have is really, really healthy, emotionally, relationally, conversationally. And because of that church is in love with the process. They said, oh my gosh, it's opened their eyes. It's like the best diagnostic thing they've ever done. And they're just absolutely in love with it. And their inspiring worship is getting better. So that's great. So the good news about coaching with NCD, in my opinion, is how I get to introduce myself. My name is Andy. Hi. I am an ambassador of hope. I'm here to help stress go down and outcomes go up, because I'm an ambassador of hope. My name is Andy. I'd like to be your friend. When I think of how NCD can reshape church culture, I am absolutely filled with hope. And I thank you for letting me be a part of this community. Thanks for giving me a chance to share today.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate and enjoy your passion. I'm wondering what the equivalent of an NCD coach altar call would be, because I feel like we should have one now. We can all come forward and be prayed for and taken up into the
confess our sins. Do you
confess our sins to one another and go on to be more Christ-like coaches. Thank you so much, Andy, for your passion and reflections and saying it as it is. It's wonderful. look, I'd love to just open up for any questions anyone might have, but also I would just flag that if you would like to get in contact with any of the speakers, I'm sure they'd be happy to receive an email and have a chat further about any of these topics as well. But if you have any questions right now, please perhaps raise your hand and we'll fire away. I think all mysteries of life have been sorted at the moment. Wonderful. Jesus can return. That's excellent. Look, I
have one, Adam.
Oh, yes, please.
I guess for us post-COVID, I'm dealing with a lot of churches who are still reestablishing some of their methods and their organization. And so I worry about using the NCD, the church health survey, because maybe the small groups are not back yet, or they're still gearing up. I'm just wondering if there are alternatives that people are finding and are using in the meantime, or how are they approaching that issue when the church is still trying to get back to where they were, or at least some semblance of where they were. That could be to any of them.
Any of our presenters like to offer a comment?
I think my answer would be that if they don't have any, if there's no, a small group is any group of people that is small. But if you feel like still it's unapplicable, I would still run the survey and just ignore that as a minimum factor. And that might be a little different, but it would certainly help you to evaluate the other areas of a church. That could be a thought.
I've done a number of NCD surveys with congregations since we've been in the pandemic and through it, and with Andy as well. It's still the right thing to do to introduce the language, to paint the pictures we want them to understand related to healthy, and contextualizing it with what you can surmise the influence of COVID and the situations have added to the mix. You can still look at those results with a grain of salt and understand reasons behind why something might show up the way it does once you know what's going on in the environment. So I'd still encourage them to take it.
Perhaps I'd just add a comment, a technical comment there, that in one sense, as long as you select the appropriate people for the survey, it will be accurate at any point in time that you take it. It's more just a matter if you know that there's a change happening and that it is going to transition very clearly in a relatively short time frame, then sometimes it's worthwhile waiting at least until that known transition is there. But of course, for many churches, tomorrow is still always coming, and so we want to avoid the procrastination as well, because I guess the critical thing is helping them to prioritize something at a given time so that they're not just scattering their energy in lots of directions, and many times, most times, probably towards the things they prefer and things that are already perhaps their maximum factors.
Good point.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Andy?
I'm curious from our international audience, my observations about the American church with our addiction. Do you see that in your part of the world? I'm just curious, or is it just an American thing?
You've had a lot of influence, you know, you Americans, because you're not the only ones.
Okay. Just you know what assuming does, and I don't want to do that.
Yes. I think broadly speaking, in working across many different countries, the general problem of measuring the wrong things, and most notably physical things, because it's so easy. You can count money, you can measure buildings, like the physical measurement side is a perpetual problem everywhere, and so measuring the intangible, yet in one sense, dramatically more powerful dynamics of relationship with God, with others, and with the outside world is always going to be a very helpful transition. And for that matter, it's also going to much more deeply answer any legitimate concerns behind the finance and numbers and everything else, because it's the root before the fruit. But it's definitely an issue in many places, and just shifting the metric. How do we measure everything? What do we give worthship to? That's the difference.
I wanted to say that, coming from Europe, being in the US, I still see that there is really performance orientation. Pastors feel responsible for church succeeding, which means church would be growing. And if it's not growing as, some of the model churches they have, then they get depressed, or they don't like it. Which brings me back, Andy, to what Gary Diehl talked in the beginning, where he was focusing on the question, our pastors are too busy, which I found interesting. That's part of actually the package of being a healthy church in US. Often even the mega churches or larger healthy churches scoring really high in 80s, 90s, they usually have this question, one of the lowest. And you wonder why. Of course, Gary's, I really appreciate him focusing on the story behind, because I could easily be influenced by what these mega churches that I was part of, producing the results had, and it was basically all the followers happily following the vision of the leaders and supporting them and being proud of them being busy and considering it actually as a good thing. So it's part of the health. But that's not the whole picture, as he's mentioned, and we have to be more sensitive and see if this comes aboard, if what's really the cause of pastors being too busy. So Gary, maybe you want to add something to that, but I appreciated you helping us to do the non-NCD work in assessing the health.
Sure. It's always, again, the right thing to look for what's actually going on in some of these specifics. I have seen that answer to that question, our pastors are too busy, the responses, I've seen it both reveal something that is unhealthy, confirm something that is healthy, but I've also seen it used as a weapon when there have been issues in one way or another with a pastor, or the relationship with pastor and congregation or leaders. Knowing what's actually going on in the story is way more valuable to what you do about it than simply what's the number.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments?
I have another.
Yes.
How have any of the churches used, coaches used the NCD survey in period of transition when a new pastor is coming in, as sort of giving them a sense of what's there? And how should the congregation respond to questions about the leader? Is it the previous leader that they should be reflecting on? So that's my question.
I can add a comment to that, it's become significantly more popular for churches to make use of the survey in transition periods, in part because there are so many churches without pastors. And so they're thinking, well, do we sit on our hands? What do we do in the meantime? But also when pastors are considering a new calling to a church, it's becoming increasingly popular for them to say, well, before I go into this place and start to be blamed for whatever's going on there, I'd really like to get a clear reading when it's nothing to do with me, because that will give me at least a year, perhaps, where I can say, right, let's address things and get some clear air around that. So there's been a marked increase in the level of engagement with that. On the practical level, because the leadership questions in the survey are nearly all expressed in the plurality of leadership, then it generally just requires a clarifying note to say, when you think about leaders, and this is the way people tend to think anyway when they're responding to the survey, is who is it that you see as leading the church presently, or who do you see as the people of greatest influence in the life of the church right now, and respond according to that. And encouragingly, it doesn't seem to come up very often that empowering leadership is, by any stretch, the worst of the concerns in those periods, often because the people have had to step up in the interim space anyway. It's often become a slightly more empowering church because they need to figure out how to keep going. But in the meantime, while they're perhaps still looking for a pastor, they can take whatever energy they have and focus that in on a specific area, and gives them a purpose and gives them a mini vision for a period of time, even if they're in transition.
If I could, Adam, Leroy, we just have gone through a little bit of a transition. I was at a church for 21 years. And through that particular period of time, we did use the NCD survey very, very regularly. And we just left last October. But we really encourage the NCD process to continue to be part of the rhythm of the church and the assessment of the church going forward. We were very fortunate that we had a transition plan too in place. So we were there while the new pastor came in. That was sort of a real healthy environment for the people to actually see us as pastors in relationship and conversation together. So you're really, really curious. That was just 6 months ago. And from what I'm understanding, Bill Bickle, who's the NCD Canada representative, just had a meeting last night with my former church, and they are now moving forward with a survey. So I think it'll give them a really good understanding that number one, I think that the leadership team are really the people that are of value there, that the assessment will be really, really valuable for them to know that it didn't just rely upon the pastor of the church. It was a very, very strong leadership team. So I think the questions around leadership will be more than mine or my successor, but rather the leadership team at large. I've just now moved into a consulting role for the Salvation Army in Ontario, Canada. And part of what this experience has been very, very valuable for me as I move into more of a coaching role now that uses the NCD tool. So I just want to thank each of the presenters. It's been very, very insightful in terms of some of your reflections and your learning. So grateful.
Yes. Thank you, Brian. Yes, just following on from that, and we should probably wrap up now. Again, yes, thank you to our presenters. Very inspiring. And what's so exciting is that behind these presenters, there are other waves of people, I mean, in the group today, but also others around the world who are making these kind of experiences, and the stories are emerging. Historically, we've been very poor in the NCD world at sharing the stories. It almost had been an anti-story environment because, no, it's about the principles. It's not about nice stories and models and things. And that's not the healthiest situation to have. But we've recognized that it needs to be both and you'll be hearing a lot more from Melinda in the coming days. She's taken on a role recently in interviewing pastors and churches around the world who've been making good progress, churches of all sorts of shapes and sizes, and reporting on those stories. And that's been a very exciting development, and part of what we're working on at the moment to really bring the NCD world much closer together so that people can learn from these experiences, connect with each other, can simply find out maybe there's someone even in my own denomination on the other side of the world that I could meet with and be encouraged by and work together with. So we're very excited about what we're working on at the moment towards bringing everyone closer, and sessions like this are very much geared towards that. So again, thank you to the presenters. Thank you all for attending. I don't know whether it's the breath of God, but we have a storm raging outside our house right now. So I'll take that as some harvest of souls or some symbol from the heavens. I don't know what it is, but I've asked Melinda if she would be happy to just pray with us all right now as we go our separate ways.
Our Father, who is in heaven, honored be your name. Your kingdom come and your will be done on our patch of earth as it is in heaven. I thank you so much, Father, for the love that you have for us. And I pray that whatever our role, whatever stage of journey we are currently on, we will find ourselves enjoying the delight of being loved by you through whatever we are doing, and that we will bring that sense of intimate and vital connection with you to every person that we are interacting with and trying to coach and encourage and help to grow. I pray that the delight that we have in one another will be the hallmark of everything we do. There will be a lot of joy and laughter between the Creator and us, and that vitality and life will flow out like living waters from within. And this I pray in the name of Jesus Christ, for whom we live and serve and in whom we have our being. Thank you. And in your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Goodbye, everyone.